Pues muy bien, bienvenidos a todas y todos. Es un gusto tenerlos el día de hoy con nosotros en este ejercicio denominado Happy Hour PJ. Es para nosotros un gusto arrancar con este tipo de iniciativas y ejercicios que buscan acercar a jóvenes de distintas partes del mundo para poder compartir reflexiones e ideas y tratar de encontrar puntos de encuentro que nos permitan de alguna manera enfrentar de mejor forma esta situación que nos ha tenido, yo creo que a todos, en una situación distinta, lo que supone a su vez retos nuevos y por supuesto un cambio en la forma en que pues convivimos, compartimos, trabajamos y hacemos nuestras actividades cotidianas. En ese sentido, es un gusto tener a todas y todos ustedes y por supuesto les comento que la conversación se va a llevar a cabo en inglés y podrán ustedes hacia el final de la conversación compartirnos sus comentarios, sus ideas en la sección de Q&A para que puedan ser tomadas en consideración. Now, before we start, I just want to thank me, Armstrong, and the team from Arizona State University for their support for this event and to bring together such talented young professionals. It's a very real pleasure for PJCOMEXI to have you here. Now I'm pleased to introduce Aline Gusick. Aline is a young associate from COMEXI. She received a Master of Public Administration degree from Columbia University School of International and Public Affairs. She's a member of the first ever class in the University Stories to graduate online, and she will address us a message to start this conversation. We want to make a family conversation, so please, Aline, feel free.
Thank you, Jorge, and thank you, COMEXI and ASU for organizing such an important event. I think that our policy brains are really hard at work thinking about solutions to address this issue, but I ask you to, even though that's very important and we need that, to just put that on pause. We are here as students, we're here as young professionals, and we're just here to talk about how this pandemic has really shaped our lives. So first, let's begin by introducing who we have here today. And it's a pleasure to introduce Mia Armstrong, who is a journalist and coordinator at the Convergence Lab from Arizona State University. She was working in Ciudad del Carmen, Campeche with a Fulbright grant, but had to cut her travel short, and she's now in Tucson, Arizona. So thank you, Mia, and thank you also for organizing this event. Then we have Maggie Zheng, who is also a graduate from ASU and was located in China with a Borean scholarship working at Springboard, which is an education startup. She obviously also had to go back to the US and is now in Wisconsin. So thank you very much for joining us today. And we have Jason Porter, who is a PhD candidate in history at Northwestern University and a research fellow at Noria, Mexico and Central America. Like the other colleagues, he was also a Fulbright Garcia Robles scholar from 2019 to 2020, working in Mexico City, but had to cut his trip short and is back in Chicago. And now from our Mexican side, we have Mariana Rafael, who also just graduated from a Master in Public Policy from Georgetown. So congratulations, Mariana, and is navigating the uncertain job market in DC. Uncertain is really the key word here in this event. Then we have Rodrigo Jimenez Silva, who is a consultant in climate change at the GIC. He was also previously in the executive board of COMEXI's youth program, and he's now in Berlin. I have to say it's 2 a.m. in Berlin, so thank you, Rodrigo, for putting many alarm clocks and waking up for this. We really, really appreciate it. And finally, we have Diego Rivera Ribota, who is a visiting researcher at the Asia Pacific Energy Center based in Tokyo. It's 8 a.m., I think, so also thank you for waking up early. So before we begin, I really want to encourage our audience to write your comments, write your questions, and we will be sure to incorporate your questions during the dialogue. We have set up this conversation as follows. First, we will just begin talking about our experiences, as I've mentioned, as student and as a young scholar of how the coronavirus really affected our lives and what that meant for us. Then we will move on to talk about our expectations and specifically in our field of work and what the future of employment looks like. Then we'll have just an open dialogue where we'll incorporate the questions from the audience. And finally, we will end with final words from our panelists and hopefully on a positive note, which we were saying is a little bit hard, but we will do our best. So let's begin by that. Tell us what it meant for you as a student or for you as a young professional to have your life turned upside down by the coronavirus. And also tell us in this context, what uncertainty meant for you. We have about 15 minutes. So Mia, maybe we can begin with you.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me. And I think it's a hard question. And I also think it's important to acknowledge that obviously my life has not been turned upside down in the way that many people's has. I'm healthy, my family's healthy. And so obviously there's that context. But when all of this hit, I remember it was March 13th. I was in Ciudad del Carmen. I was in the mall in Ciudad del Carmen because if you've been to Ciudad del Carmen, you know there's not a ton to do there, but I was in the mall at a Starbucks and I got this email from the US State Department who was managing the program that I was on at the time. I was speaking English and doing some research and basically it was an advisement to come home, come back to the US. And so I was kind of, later the State Department sent all Fulbright grantees home by force, but at that point kind of I was left with a choice to go home or to stay in Mexico. So I remember in that moment I thought back to 2017 when I was in Mexico City and I was actually studying at the Tech when the September 19th earthquake hit. And anyone who was in Mexico City during that earthquake kind of knows just what a traumatic event that was like. And at that time, I also had kind of had a choice of, do I stay in Mexico City and the campus of the Tech was destroyed. So do I stay there and take my classes online or do I go home back to the US? And in that case, it almost didn't feel like an option to me because I felt so connected to Mexico City and to the community there and wanted to kind of heal from that collective trauma of the earthquake there with my community. But in the case of the pandemic, I did a lot of thinking and realized that it kind of made the most sense for me to go back to the US and be with my family. So, I've been here since and kind of navigating the privilege of that, right? Like the privilege to even be able to choose to cross borders because you want to, or because you're making a decision of what's most comfortable for you. That's kind of a brief summary of my thoughts on that.
Great. Thank you, Mia. And you're right. And also privilege is another key word. We have the privilege of being able to be in quarantine and in isolation. And while it's hard, and by upside down, I meant, not being able to attend classes and just kind of live like that rite of passage that you have. But I think we have to count our blessings and definitely, be conscious about how lucky we are. So why don't we go with you, Maggie, and just tell us about your experience.
Sure, yeah. So I was studying abroad in China on my senior year, and I'd been in China since August of 2019. And being in China, we were one of the first groups to be affected by all of the changes caused by COVID. And so I actually heard the news mid-January when our program started sending out emails saying we're reviewing and we have yet to decide what to do. And then end of January is when they told us all that we had to go home. And so end of January is a very interesting time for Chinese residents because it clashes with the Lunar New Year, which means the entire country is off work. So everyone is traveling, everyone is going home, which probably made the situation worse, but it also meant that none of the students were in Nanjing, or most of the students weren't in Nanjing where our university was, but we were also traveling the country. And so when we heard the news that we had to return, I had a backpack and a carry-on and plans to go to Taiwan and to Thailand and to a bunch of other countries that we had all planned for. And so it was incredibly difficult to just figure out what to do next. And so eventually we ended up just all booking flights back to the United States. And it was really strange because none of us had our things. Most of us were seniors, so we didn't have school to come back to. Some people didn't have housing because we were supposed to be abroad. So coming back, it was about a month of living at my parents' house, which I'm so thankful that I had a place to go home to, and kind of just looking for jobs from there. But again, none of us really had any plans or next steps. So I think a lot of us are still trying to find direction since coming back.
Thank you. I'm glad you mentioned looking for jobs because that will definitely come up in the conversation, I'm sure. And finally, Jason, you go next. How was it like to cut your trip or your work short in Mexico City?
Yes. Well, first, thank you, COMEXI, and ASU for the invitation, especially. My situation was similar to Mia's in the sense, am I clear? Can y'all hear me? I have like a on. Okay, cool. So my situation was similar to Mia's in the sense that I was in Mexico on a Fulbright, and it was both coronavirus and the U.S. State Department that made me come back. So, because I could have stayed. So I heard a few days after Mia, I was doing research in Mexico City, and I think it was March 15th, we basically had an option. We could stay so long as the commission in Mexico would have us, health insurance, this, that, and the third, right? I think it was like 3 days later, March 18th, we find out that we have like the chance to like go home or and receive full pay, and everything would be fine. But we could still stay at this point. So I feel like most of the researchers, there was 9 of us in Mexico City, most of the researchers kind of felt like, this was our dissertation research, right? This was our year, to be in Mexico doing work towards our dissertation. So this was, wasn't, leaving wasn't too much of an option for a lot of us. So we had decided on March 15th that we would stay. But by March 21st, we basically get a message from the State Department saying that we could stay in Mexico, but we would not, be granted alumni status. We wouldn't get paid. We wouldn't have access to health insurance. They wouldn't be sure whether or not we would be able to go home. They wouldn't be able to grant us, guaranteed access into the United States. So basically they said we could stay, but we couldn't. I mean, I basically got a message from my university that morning saying, you're about to get a message from the State Department. If you decide to go against their wishes, you'll have to sign this release from the university as well. So, I mean, it was pretty strong-armed. So for me, it was pretty crappy for an assortment of reasons. One, like I had like 6 talks to give, like in Guadalajara and Aguascalientes, and also Amsterdam and Ottawa and Chicago. I was, doing a little tour for some research stuff with some folks, and all of that got canceled. I do have some, some good stories to, some silver linings at the end. But some of the worst things were I just didn't have anywhere to go. So my apartment in Chicago is being sublet until June 1st. So I my stuff is on the floor because I moved in here 2 days ago. I was in an Airbnb studio by myself for 70 days. My dad works at a hospital, so I couldn't stay with him. And my mother was taking care of my grandparents who are in their 90s, so I couldn't go with her. So I had to figure out where to go. My apartment was full, so I just like found an Airbnb studio I couldn't afford, and last second, and that's where I had been for I had spent my birthday there. I spent my it was quite the but I do look, it wasn't easy, but I definitely have other things to say about uncertainty, and then also how we all got through it because we're all here. And but yeah, that's kind of the gist.
We'll get to that. And also, your dad is a hero. I mean, you know, just being on the front lines of this whole thing?
I mean, honestly, like the U.S. government forced my dad back into the U.S. military. He's tapped in the military. He's a military surgeon. Does triage. So yeah, he's a serious man. But yeah, he's 61, and they forced him back into the military to open up field hospitals outside of New York City. I mean, I was scared, very scared. But yeah, thank you. I appreciate that.
No, with good reason. So Mariana, I think if you're in your first day at Georgetown, if someone would tell you that your master's degree would end like this, you would never in your life believe it. So what was it like moving to online classes and just general experience?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I mean, of course, coming from Mexico and coming to the campus in Georgetown, one of the things that you really look forward to is the graduation day in front of the castle and just being able to finish your degree there. For me, it was like a complete surprise because our spring break was at the same time. So I actually thought I was leaving school for spring break, and I just never came back because during that week, they moved everything to online classes. So I never, like, I didn't know my last class was my last class. So for spring break, I was actually planning a trip to Spain, which at that point I was like, I think I should cancel it. Like I didn't foresee how bad things were gonna be. So I just like said, I think it's better to cancel it and be safe here. My roommate still went to Spain. She couldn't move back to the US. She had to go to Mexico. And then priorities started to change for me because, I mean, one point was, okay, so what's gonna happen now? Like, I am here, I stayed, but maybe we're gonna go back to classes. So and I mean, I don't know, like in your universities, but in Georgetown, they kept like releasing information little by little. So it was like, okay, so for now, it's just gonna be April is going to be online. So we didn't know, like until the very end, we knew, okay, we are actually graduating online and we're finishing everything like that. So yeah, I mean, I would have never thought of that. My thesis presentation was online, everything switched. But as you mentioned, like, even if it was very frustrating in the beginning, I was always thankful for having a safe place. I mean, yeah, I didn't have the graduation I wanted, which I think it sucks, but it's not as bad as things some other people are witnessing or experiencing. So yeah, that was it. And now, well, I stayed here because I actually thought about going back home and saying like, well, I finished school, I can just go back with my family because I was here by myself. So I was like, I want to be with my family, but I was a risk for me to fly from the US and then to get home. So I just decided to stay here. And here I am. Yeah.
Good. Well, we're glad you're safe. And yeah, it's a weird guilt to think about being, you know, frustrated about graduation, but then looking into the world and seeing the actual, you know, effects of the pandemic. So it's strange to see that it is kind of valid. You know, every struggle is valid at some point. So I understand. And Rodrigo, now you lived through this a little bit earlier than all of us, I think. Well, except for maybe the Asian side of the world. So tell us about your experience.
Sure. And first of all, thank you to PJCOMEXI for organizing this. And I'm delighted to meet you all. In my case, I was very aware of the situation since February, I would say. And but I actually managed to travel by the end of February around Europe for work, at the beginning of March as well. But then I started to worry because I had been, of course, in train stations, at an airport, and this somehow it was at the back of my head that I needed to check, or I needed to isolate for at least 2 weeks until I was sure that I didn't have any symptoms. And I was just in the middle of a search for a new house. My contract in the last place I lived was just about to expire. I unfortunately didn't find anything. But fortunately, in one of these trips, the last one I actually had, they called me and then they told me, "Are you still interested in the apartment?" I didn't even remember which one it was. I didn't have photos. I was just like, yes, but I'm on a trip right now, business trip. I will be back a week from now. Can you wait for me? Yes. So that was March 12th already. I go there, I sign the contract. They give me 2 days to pay the deposit. There was a weekend in between. And then I started to get nervous. Like, will I get the house? I need to get out of this other, what is going on? And they said, yes, we will give you the keys on Tuesday. Okay, perfect. And then on Monday, I was getting ready, you know, like starting to think. And then my boss, I was still at the office, and my boss arrives to the office, opens the door and tells me, what are you doing here? I was like, working. And he literally told me, like, haven't you read the news? There is some rumors that tomorrow everything will shut down and there will not be stores until June. And I know you're moving to a new place tomorrow. So if I were you, I would go today to IKEA or to whatever and buy everything, the fridge, the bed, everything. And I was like, I couldn't believe it. I was like, well, how am I supposed to do it? Where am I supposed to store it? I get the keys tomorrow. It's a blank canvas, basically. Like, what do I do? I came home, what was home back then, and I decided not to. The day after 9 a.m., they give me the keys. I go, I have the new apartment. I'm super happy, and oh, surprise, everything was closed. So I was basically moving into an empty place. But this also brings me back to the matter of privilege, that fortunately I have somewhere to go last minute. But yeah, this is how it basically impacted my life. In parallel, just as a very short, I had family in Europe as well studying, that they also had their studies cut short. And I was calling them with my family, and they were asking me, can we send my nephew was in a neighboring country. Can we send him to you? Can you take care of him? And these kind of decisions that you have to make, and in a very spontaneous and fast way, I simply said no, because I was not sure what was going to happen. I was not sure if I could take care of my nephew, for instance, if health insurance would cover. What happens if he gets the virus? What do I do? How do I send him back? All these kind of questions. This is how my world was turned upside down, basically. Yeah.
No, so many unanswered questions that we never think about before. And finally, Diego, we are on to you. I hope you can hear us.
Yeah, perfectly. So first of all, thank you for having me. Thank you, COMEXI, and thank you, ASU. It's very interesting to listen to all your stories. And I feel more identified with that of Maggie, which is kind of similar in terms that a coronavirus has been here in Japan, in Asia for a while now. It really started late in late January, where, if you remember, there was this cruise stuck there in Yokohama. And then since then, like, this thing was really one of the first countries which got hit after China, right? And so there was at first a lot of skepticism here. And so it's like, how serious is this coronavirus stuff? Back in February. It sounds now like another era, really. But, you know, everybody was like kind of like going through normal and stuff in February. And then it suddenly, cases started to go up in Korea and here in Japan. And at our work at the office, there's a lot of people from Vietnam, from Taiwan, from China, from a lot of places that traveled, as she said, on the Lunar New Year, right? And so people were going out to other countries, to China, to Wuhan directly. People were coming here, tourists still by then, by late January. So it was kind of like, oh, it's not serious. And it was only until mid-March when things got really bad in Europe, when people in Japan, and the government particularly, really started taking it seriously. Also, if you remember at the time, everything in Japan was about the Olympics, right? And the priority of the government, of Prime Minister Abe, of the governor Koike, was the Olympics will go on, no worries, we'll control this virus. And that turned out to be pretty terribly wrong, right? Like just, and so it started being like when we and started looking to these, you know, crazy scenes of what was going on in Italy, what was going on in Spain, and later in the US. And somehow, like, you got friends, you got like family even that are living close to those places. And Japan was doing nothing. And here was just business as usual. And people were traveling trips abroad at work. So like my boss would come to me, oh, we have this conference. We're going to Malaysia in April. I'm like, I don't think we're going to Malaysia or to anywhere for that matter. And so it was really like this miscommunication. And then there were these hints and really was a break point when they postponed the Olympics. And then from that point, cases in Tokyo started growing up crazily. And so at that point, there was like 3 or 4 calls to order or calls to like a soft lockdown, but it was not clear. And that's been definitely a key problem here in Japan, which is communication. And even worse for us gaijin, for us foreigners that speak pretty terrible Japanese. So we have a lag on communication. So we had like 3-4 waves of panic shopping. So you would go there to the supermarket, there's nothing, all the Japanese have taken everything and you just have like the leftovers from that. It was really, really intense. And then only after that, there was like a wave, pretty bad wave here in Tokyo and in other places of Japan. And then it was only then a pretty late lockdown in late March. And then since then, we've been confined to work, and at least in my case, in these tiny apartments, right? Like in Japan, as you know, in Tokyo, spaces, everything is pretty small. And so it's just being weird. I never in my life have been stuck in 4 walls for so long, and just the fact to be completely by yourself here, right? Like it's tough. And exactly on that point, it was my birthday on March 31st, and I was turning 30. So it was not at all what I expected for that. But then, I was like pretty sad about it. But then, like in the great scheme of things, when you compare that to what's going on in the rest of the world, which are real tragedies, real problems, just like, for example, like Jason's story was pretty much more like crude and grim. So, I mean, once you put that in context, then it's just better. But it's been just like a very weird situation of being here in a country where you don't understand or understand very late what's going on. And then despite all what we were thinking, now since things are going back to kind of normal, to this weird normal. But there's a lot of unexplained fears in the case of Japan. Like Tokyo was heading to be New York 2.0, and then it didn't happen. And really, nobody quite knows detailedly why. Like there's a medical debate and all that, but then it happens, and some people just going back to normal now, which sounds pretty crazy. At the same time that we're looking what's going on in Mexico, for example, or Brazil. So that's kind of worry, just trying to be in touch with your family. And so, yeah, so everything canceled, all like international conferences, kind of all that stuff, and just working in this like tiny space for them. So that's how it's been here in Tokyo.
Well, thank you everyone for sharing your experience. And I think one of the ideas behind this event, if not the main idea, was that we can very uniquely speak about being foreigners in a country that that is not our country, and how we fit into the puzzle, and how the coronavirus meant for us. I think a lot of it really was uncertainty about legal status, about what this means for our studies, and things like that. So moving on now towards what are our expectations. It's valid to put on our policy cap back on. And I think it's divided in 2 things. One is for those of us who are already employed and who are really living, how our specific sectors are shifting. And then those of us who's, in my case, in the job search. The job search really changed completely. And I think it has become a bit more challenging, or, now there are all these talks how to job search during a pandemic, which is, something that we've never really would really think about. So going back to those who already have, a job or know what they're going to do next, I'm going to risk in asking first, again, Mia, starting, I think, with you, just to talk about, what's next for you and how your specific field, if you want, and you don't have to make it as specific, but how is journalism going to change now in this new normal that Diego was talking about?
Yeah. So I was, in the middle of this 9-month Fulbright grant. And so when that got cut short in March, I was able to do kind of some freelance contract work for a while. And then I actually have just, was lucky enough to be able to start my position with Arizona State University, running our Convergence Lab project. That job was is supposed to be based mostly in Mexico City. And so right now I'm in Arizona, going through the process of applying for a visa. The consulates were closed for a long time here. And then also just thinking about, is it safe to travel right now, both for me and other people? When will I be able to travel and end up in Mexico City, without doing harm to myself or other people in the process. And so I think, something that we haven't talked about yet is just kind of the relationships, I think, that are drawing us back to where we left, or keeping us where we are. So that was one of the hardest things for me in leaving was, I left my long-term partner in Mexico City, and we have done long distance Mexico, the US for almost 3 years now, but never have we been apart and not known the next time that we'll be able to be together. So I think for me, that kind of speaks to this idea of kind of borders separating people more so than they separate, political entities, different countries, right? Like the importance, the impact is in the separation of people and communities. And so I think for me, that's tied to my work as a journalist too. That's kind of where my heart is. And when I was in Carmen, one of my bigger projects was an interviewing project with women who work on offshore oil platforms. Obviously, most of you will be familiar with the fact that Ciudad del Carmen is a big oil island, a big headquarters for Pemex. And so, I had planned all of these interviews, established relationships with all of these really amazing women, and was working on that project. And I'm now having to do that from a distance, right? And so that's kind of been hard for me professionally in that way, because as a journalist, it's super hard to connect with someone and really get to know their story, via WhatsApp voice messages or video calls. Obviously it's great to have that option, but especially now, because thinking about the offshore oil industry, a lot of the people who are working on platform are in really dangerous situations with the contagion and kind of being in close quarters with other folks. So there's a lot of super heartbreaking stories, really traumatic stories. And so, providing a space for people as a journalist to kind of share that trauma, but not knowing how to, it's I think the hardest thing as a journalist is working with people who are experiencing trauma and doing that in a way that's respectful and connecting with folks. And so I think that's one of the biggest challenges, I would say, kind of for me personally as a journalist. But I obviously, there's a ton of challenges for the industry right now, especially economically and financially, I think. But yeah.
No, that's a good point. And obviously, online is not the same as in person. Because not everyone has access to the internet, which is also a separate thing in itself. Maggie, what about you? Have you have your future certain, do you know your next steps, and how will your specific field change?
Yeah, so I kind of want to talk about two fronts a little bit, because I was actually planning on applying to medical school just a few months ago, but decided to hold off on that currently. And it's been really interesting seeing the different responses that the US and China had respectively in reaction to COVID, because I was there in China in January when people were still saying that, oh, it's just the flu. Like, I don't know what the big deal is. People weren't really sure if it was actually deadly, but literally, like, within weeks, it was required by law to wear a mask outside, and every public transit, every subway station had I think police officers who would take your temperature and check your status to see if you've traveled or if you were sick, and there was virtually no one on the streets. It was like a ghost town, and it was very eerie seeing entire subways completely empty, or the beach empty, And then returning back to the States, it was so interesting because at least in Arizona, it felt like no one really cared, or even if they knew, people still wouldn't wear masks. They're like on the streets, it just looked like life was normal. And now Arizona has opened up again, and I'm also kind of worried, like, if there's going to be a new resurgence. So in relation to the medical field, I think US doctors haven't been receiving the amount of support they need to fight COVID in the United States. And I know that has definitely caused a lot of frustration and disenchantment with the healthcare system in the United States. And it's definitely something that worries me as well if I ever decide to apply to medical school again. Switching gears a little bit, I'm now currently working in the online learning space. And since COVID has happened, we've actually seen a rise in enrollments, which is fairly expected. During times of recession, people usually go back to school. But I think what's interesting is that online learning is becoming a bigger and bigger thing. And so I think COVID is just adding fuel to the growth of this industry. And we're just looking at better ways to help people engage, because learning online is very isolating, and it does require an incredible amount of willpower and motivation. So that's kind of my thoughts on those two industries.
I think you picked two key industries that I think will be two of the most affected. Health, obviously, being the first one, but education as well.
Mm-hmm.
So Rodrigo, you had to go to work in 5 hours, something like that. So what's that gonna look like, both in employment and also in climate change?
Yes, actually, when this all started and international events started to be postponed, we thought, at least within my team, that perhaps things were going to go slower, that we would have to wait. And in a certain way, it has been like this. For instance, the next COP has been postponed for 1.5 years from now. So this is one big impact. What do we do from now till November 2021? We had already a working program, a plan already there. And we thought, okay, perhaps we're going to go slower. The thing is, I think it has not been the case when it comes to the different work streams that somehow emerged. There was a need, for instance, to see, even before the discussions and the webinars and everything, what was really the new buzzwords, the new narratives for climate, how to keep momentum, how to keep ambition when it comes to climate ambition, basically. And this was very difficult because this is normally fed by the experiences and the narratives, the stories from the ground, and helped by social movements like the students demonstrating in Fridays for Future. But when all these things are not happening, then there is a limbo there that that somehow made us think, okay, what are the topics? Why should we be advising on? And in a certain way, I can say that so many other topics have emerged, so many other, let's say, activities and communication with partners that didn't happen before have started. And I think this is also a way of navigating this uncertain and this VUCA context of volatility and uncertainty. And in this sense, I think it is very positive, because it's a way of keeping momentum. It's a way of keeping the conversation alive. But at the other, it kind of makes me think, what is the real core of my activity? What am I supposed to focus on? Should I focus on everything at the same time for the sake of being current and for the sake of keeping all the emerging topics controlled? I think that the question as well is, how do I see this developing, and how do I see, for instance, the climate sector developing? I think there will be a lot of work around the topics of green recovery and somehow still just transition, because I think this is the core of the conversation. And one of the things that this pandemic has exposed is even more the differences, the inequalities between societies and between countries. And I think it will be person driven, and it will be more focused on not so much in the process of the Paris Agreement, in the methodologies, in the discussions, but more on the actual implementation of the Paris Agreement. And we have good news for the climate sector. Due to this virus, CO2 emissions are at the levels of 10 years ago. But the discussion there is whether this will continue like this. Will governments already see that there is a transition, a path towards transition, or will everything go back to how it used to be in a couple of more months? So yeah, it's uncertain, but at the same time, so many topics are happening at the same time. And yeah, it's a little bit difficult to keep up with, but yeah.
No, that's true. I hope people are more aware, climate aware, and that's definitely been a positive externality. So Jason, what about you? And it's not that I skipped you. I just wanted to make sure that Rodrigo was awake and paying attention. And I didn't want him to fall back asleep.
That's
so
all right.
Tell us, Jason, hopefully you fixed your housing issue for now or in the long term.
I did. So no, so I talked a little bit about the uncertainty that I felt in the midst of my change, but as a lot of people have mentioned before, I do feel like I am the beneficiary of quite a bit of privilege, and I do feel like I'm very secure in my financial situation going forward. I was this happened during a fellowship year. So yeah, that was really disadvantageous to research. I lost 3 months. I have a lot of dissertation research to do. I still need to go back to Sinaloa and Chilpancingo and a lot of other places in Mexico. I have another fellowship year next year. So I'm very lucky in the sense that if things open back up, I'm free to go back to Mexico. And that's that. The job market's very different for a lot of people in graduate school. And I do think that within the graduate school conversation, I do also feel like I'm very privileged. I can't imagine, preparing for exams right now, or preparing your perspectives for your dissertation, or preparing to jump on the job market. So I do think that the precarity is high in graduate school across the board. I think and it's also different between graduate school. I know a lot of graduate schools are trying to tap into their endowments to, help. A lot of students are asking their schools to tap into their endowments to help students, but not every school has an endowment that can pay, 10,000 graduate students an additional year of funding. So that's something I think is going to have a huge impact on, the job market going forward. It's honestly, it's hard to talk about uncertainty right now, just in the context of COVID, because right now we're in the process of, trying to defund the police and in the United States. And the uncertainty is high. Honestly, I jumped out of quarantine in a protest with 3,000 people, which was really hard to do. After being by myself for 70 days, to be surrounded by folks, so the uncertainty is high in the United States, largely because of how it's handled COVID, and to what Rodrigo said about how it's made visible in different ways and in pronounced ways, the myriad of inequalities and inequities that hurt my country in general, and hurt people that look like me in particular. So I think that, yeah, the uncertainty is super, super high. But like a lot of people mentioned, I right now feel super, super, super lucky. Right, one of the things I want to do, if anybody has any ideas, because I know a lot of graduate students that study Mexico, both in Mexico and in the United States, are without sources, or without libraries. A lot of people have, I don't know how they're going to finish their. So one thing I'm trying to do with some of my research colleagues on Fulbright is to create a crowdsourced database of, scanned books and we'll have to deal with the books for copyright reasons, but we have a lot of primary sources that hopefully we can make a small collection of stuff, so at least people can, do a little bit of research. So that's, I think, a lot of us have to come together to, researchers, I'm sure journalists are doing a lot of things, to reach out to each other and, keep those things. I imagine this is also happening in the climate conversation too. But yeah, it's the uncertainty is super, super, super high. But I do personally feel very, very fortunate. And I'm not sure what my future holds in terms of employment, but I do have, funding for the next 2.5 years in my university. So at the very least, if, things are really bad, I can continue working on my dissertation. So yeah, we'll see how that goes.
No, if you ask me, it's justified. The protests that are going on right now are justified reason to break quarantine with some safe distance, but
yes, as much as we could. It was really beautiful.
As much as,
yeah, for sure.
No, I get that. And on that topic of job search, I know, Mariana, you just finished. I think you're still in DC, and I can't imagine. A huge part of job search in DC and in New York is networking, and now that's not possible, at least not in-person networking. So what has been your experience now after finishing grad school, and what do you think, the future of employment looks like?
Yes, absolutely. One of the reasons that I picked DC in the first place was about that. Like, you can just meet a lot of people from a lot of different industries. I had the opportunity to do that during my first year, but I was saving more for the last part when I was closer to finishing. So yeah, that has been a huge difference. Like, I had coffees and I had like a lot of things that I was planning to do, and I cannot do those anymore. I have to say that most people have been very flexible. I've had a lot of like calls and Zoom meetings, and I think people are being very understanding and saying like, well, students need us. In some cases, people have more time. In some cases, they have less. But if we all are understanding, I think it's been a surprise to see how many people are willing to talk, even if they cannot probably help as much as they could have done it a few months ago. I've had the opportunity of talking to a lot of people, but of course, the job search has been impacted. A lot of places are just froze every position, saying like, well, we're trying to rethink the whole thing. As an international student, I have a limited amount of time to look for it, so that's very stressful. It has made me think of trying to be more flexible myself on what I want, and trying to say, well, if I stay here, what would I want to do? Or if I go home, what would I want to do? And also seeing all these needs that probably were not as visible before. And as Rodrigo and Jason were mentioning, like, this has also shown very important parts of things. Just to say an example, I've worked and I'm very interested in gender-based violence, but now that it's become so visible, it's made me want to work for that even more. So, just looking to needs and looking at how the world is changing, and I really hope that this is gonna be a change. From COVID and from the protests and from a lot of things, I feel people are realizing stuff that was there. But in the job search, for sure, it's hard, but I do have to say that I've been impressed on the willingness of people to help and to understand that the class of 2020 is living a very hard experience. And if they are willing to help, I think that's a very positive note. And it's been a positive experience on my side, absolutely.
No, I get that. I think the question of what do you want to do in your life is, post-COVID, the answer changes. And finally, before we move on to the discussion and we wait for some questions to come in, Diego, what do you think is the future of energy sector?
Well, that's a big question. And I think like in these past months and for now, three words have really defined, both professionally and even like personally, which are uncertainty, borders, and inequality. I think uncertainty has been the queen of the COVIDianity, and it will remain as such, I think. Borders have just become so much more evident than we think. Even for like the different policies, the different approaches that governments are taking for the energy sector, but also for the travel restrictions, right? For example, at the moment, I cannot get out of Japan. I could leave the country, but foreigners are not allowed to come back. Japanese citizens are, even if you are a permanent resident, which is, I think, the only developed country that has taken such approach, like making a difference between citizens and residents, regardless of their current status of migration. So that poses risks for business, for example, right? If you work for a certain company and you happen to be an executive from X or Y nationality, then you can come and you can leave. And then the other thing is like travel just becomes so different, right? Like, so it's like Mexico and Japan are 14 hours away from a daily flight. But then if you have like these these restrictions, then it just becomes so much more evident that this is an island in the Pacific Ocean, and it's really far from a lot of stuff. And then in the energy sector, that has been really crazy the past months. So that's another thing that is like you're stuck here like in these like small spaces, but just like the energy world is going crazy. We saw negative prices in the case of oil, and that's directly caused by in a lot of sense directly caused by the measures taken for coronavirus and to tackle the pandemic down. So we saw like really unexpected, completely not foreseen movements in the energy sector. Very interesting. Definitely, you know, we could expect for the future, I think, that the oil and gas industry will keep suffering a lot. We've seen that, and that affects quite interestingly. So like on one side, for example, in producing countries such as Mexico, for example, but also the United States, we saw massive, you know, problems. People get laid off, problems on budget. So that happens in Texas, that happens in Mexico quite clearly. And that means less money to spend for governments in things like health, in things like schooling, in things like security, right? Which kind of touches upon like all the topics that we've been speaking about. The coal industry is quite suffering a lot. And I think there could be a good approach for renewables, for example, quite in kind of what Rodrigo was saying. But that's a debate, and that also has problems because you got a supply chain problem, which happens in other industries, but that's definitely the case also for the energy sector. And then just trying to be very brief, I'm not trying to get into the technical stuff, but like a key thing is the policies that governments take differently. And in some cases, we've been very unfortunate to see, frankly, quite opportunistic approaches. And that's definitely the case of Mexico in terms of policy, in which the Minister of Energy, for example, said that because of the pandemic and because of the emergency, then there was less electricity demand, which is true, but it was only about like 10–15%. And because of that, it would be dangerous, it would be unstable to keep bringing on renewable energy, solar and wind. And then because of that, all new projects will not come into stream. And then that's a decision that is frankly opportunistic. They were planning that for months, and they just said that because of the pandemic, they would stop to do that. Other governments have taken similar approaches. Unfortunately, other governments have like taken quite the opposite measures. And we've seen, for example, in California, we've seen even here in Japan and in other places, just like peak renewable generation and that kind of stuff. So it's really interesting what we've seen at this point. And definitely, I would like to close with that there's a big opportunity to keep going on this transition to lower carbon technologies, to boost renewables and other clean energies that could definitely work out in this recovery, in this economic crisis that is coming. And there's definitely a big opportunity for that. But as such, it would have a lot of challenges and a lot of resistance in a lot of countries like Mexico.
Thanks, Diego. That was a good answer to a complex question. So moving on now to our discussion, we have a couple of questions coming in. I will read the first one. It's from Gina, who is also in the executive board of COMEXI. She says, "Hi guys, your stories are very interesting. I identify with all of you. I would like to know if you consider that crisis will cost our generation global growth and development in order to face employment." She's the pro secretary of PJCOMEXI. I don't know if someone would like to address the issue of this generation global growth and development.
I do, if I can, Alina, I think this crisis will indeed shift the way things used to work. And this also affects employment. And this also affects the way perhaps recruitment is used to happen. I think that perhaps remote working will flourish, and this is also a way that people that are looking for employment or recent graduates might need to think and to explore becoming a freelance, becoming someone that is basically innovating all the time. And if I can suggest something for someone that is looking for a job like you guys, is to basically see what is your unique selling point, and to, in times of COVID, try to see what else you can do and how else you can differentiate from others. And the opportunity will come, but it is or I would say that the differentiating factor from yourselves, from the others, will be defined of what you did during this virus, and how well you took advantage of the time, perhaps sometimes extra time. And yeah, I think it will be difficult to find a job. It will be difficult to pursue growth and happiness for those that are basically looking for stability, but it's not impossible.
Thank you, Rodrigo. Anyone else has an answer to the question? There are actually two very similar questions that have just come up, which is, and I'll also read, you've clearly explained the challenges and negative stuff that you had to overcome during the past months. Which would you say are some opportunities that you'd highlight of working / studying overseas during this crisis? And the other question is, what do you think will be the main obstacle for young professionals, students that were looking to work or study abroad in the coming months? So I think, Rodrigo, you touched upon that a little bit. What are both the highlights and also the challenges that are undoubtedly going to arise and have done so?
I can talk a little bit about the challenges. So part of my study abroad program was actually that we had to find an internship in China. And similarly to a lot of other countries, when you are an international student in a foreign country looking for job opportunities, it's incredibly difficult to find a job, at least in my experience, because of all the visa issues. And we also weren't allowed to be paid, and often had to be slipped in kind of through a back door to have opportunities. So I think a lot of the challenges, in addition to COVID, will be that COVID displaced a lot of people, and so there will probably be a lot more people looking for jobs, and so competition will be higher. And being an international student adds another layer of complexity to that equation, because you might need company sponsorship to stay in the country, or you might not be able to get paid. So just not to be discouraging, but it is, I think it will be incredibly difficult in the coming months to find job opportunities.
I think another big thing is savings. So I think a lot of, I think if we, at the macro, and we look at poverty, I think a lot of people in lower income situations are, right above or below the poverty line, or, right now burning through the little savings that they had, are going to be forced into longer lives working, be it right after this and, decades going forward. So I do think that young professionals and employment is going to be difficult for sure, but I think at a larger scale, we're going to see large swaths of populations in need of much more social services and and we'll need a lot more, help on that front. I think that's going to be pretty big. Were we supposed to say positive things as well?
Yes.
Yeah. I do think that, well, not to like go back to a negative thing, I do think that like within university, I do think it's going to be really important. I think like, we've heard a lot about like non-tenure track professional professors, and I think the adjunct life is going to be very different. I think the adjunct life is going to, maybe it could possibly cease to exist, and the adjunct life could be completely, online, right? And like, that completely goes away because they've been able to see that, okay, schools, and we've already seen it with huge schools like CUNY and other, schools just dropping their adjunct professors, for the fall, right? Saying that we'll figure out, how to do this without you guys. And I think that's also doubly troubling, as they're recording, professors giving their lectures and their entire, they're going through entire courses, right, that are lectured. I think it's going to be really interesting to see what universities use with that as proprietary information. But for positives, I mean, I have personal positives that I can get into because I do think that, I personally, did some decent stuff while I was stuck. But I've also just seen, within like my own research group, it's 31 folks from mostly Mexico and Central America, but I think like 8 different countries around the world: France, UK, US, and all of us study, social violence or drug trafficking or migration in Mexico. I'm kind of like the environmental nerd who just like does all the like the environmental analysis, like, oh, does this happen to this forest? Well, that's not deciduous, so let's have a kind of thing. But so it's been really beautiful to see how research groups like ours have come together. So right now I'm, part of, I think you'll see a lot of really cool digital projects roll out in the next couple of months. We've been working together. I'm part of several, and I know of many, many more. So I do think that, and that was already on the rise: digital humanities, digital storytelling, all of those things. There's a huge, like not think tank or workshop at my university that basically just creates software around digital storytelling and humanity. And I do think that our ability to tell stories and to reach wider audiences, and I think as communicators, be it, a historian like myself or journalists, or, I think we'll be forced to find really new ways to communicate effectively to broader audiences. And if we do so effectively, I think that could be really, really good. But the onus is on us to do correct, for sure.
I would just build, if I could jump off of kind of that positive. I think what you mentioned about collaboration is super. I think that's my big positive. And I think, Diego said it really well, that this crisis has really highlighted kind of the borders that divide us. But I think it's also highlighted that all of our biggest challenges, I think, or many of our biggest challenges are cross borders, right? Are global. And so, I would hope, if I'm being an optimist, if I'm having an optimistic day, I would hope that coming off of this, rather than seeing countries turn inward, we'll see countries turn to each other to try and, work together on some of those biggest problems. That's why I love the work that we try and do through Convergence Labs. I mean, it's all at ASU. It's about thinking about our biggest problems, cross-border problems, and then like innovating towards cross-border solutions. So I think if I have one hope for all of this, I think my hope would be that we'll reflect and realize, looking at the US and Mexico in particular, that, we need each other going forward, and hopefully we can put all of our energy into that.
Great.
If I may, I also think quite in line with that, that there's probably going to be a move to people rethinking what does it mean and why would you be working abroad and kind of like this time away, kind of like people living away from their dear ones, from their families, from their places that they are from. And so I think there'd be kind of like that process of people moving back in certain cases, and that also would like give opportunities to people to really go to the adventure, because less people would be willing to you know, like go for it elsewhere. So I think that would give a chance to people that you know want to find a job elsewhere to do that. But yeah, that being said, I do think some industries and some economically some aspects of the economy would be really bad hit. And so there's a chance to kind of like be innovative, to be flexible, and kind of like, yeah, try to find alternative sources or ways to collaborate, like what Jason was saying. And I think for me, I don't know if I've been particularly sensitive with that, but in the journalism field, at least, I've seen amazing, really great jobs, like in great pieces, right, that are really touching upon a lot of topics that are going on at the same time, just like the coverage of coronavirus, then like with all the protests recently, just really interesting stuff in that field. For example, in journalism, that is really interesting. In the energy sector, hopefully we would see more collaboration across that, and maybe not having this fancy, you know, international conference that happen a lot, but there are a lot of more ways to practically like tackle those breaks. And finally, like on the last note, I would say that there's a lag across regions, but definitely in some areas of the world, in some places, I think definitely in Asia and in Europe is coming to that. This new reality, this new COVIDianity, as people sometimes call it, it's already happening, and it's already on its way. So things are slowly trying to get back to this weird new normal, but then like it's been a shock. But I think things will get better. That's my personal optimistic view of that. But it will be a process of adaptation and flexibility, really.
Mm-hmm.
Great. We have a question from or is it to a student? So student life. For those of us whose graduate program had to transition online to the so-called Zoom university, as sometimes it's referred to. The question is, do you think the online learning will affect your standing in the job market / become an obstacle? The question comes from the rationale that it might force students from this online generation to sell themselves through their university's prestige, since people might think online learning doesn't equally put you out in the job market as someone that had traditional learning experience in their master's degree. So that's the question. Mariana, I don't know if you want to speak about that.
Yes. Well, I mean, speaking of someone who's only last semester was interrupted, I certainly don't think that's the case. I mean, I do believe that online classes are very different from inside classes, but I think that mainly for those of us whose studies were interrupted, I don't think of it as a disadvantage, because I think it also brings out some skills about us that I think that are more important, that what can be taught in a classroom. So I think that being able to adapt from inside to online classes in a matter of days, and changing the way you learn and changing the way you do assignments or you do presentations or you do exams, I think that those skills are way more important that can be taught in a board, in a classroom. And I think that employers will look at that as well. I don't know how it's gonna be like for people that are actually starting their program online, since we don't know exactly how much that's gonna last. I would not, I'm not sure how I feel on that regard. But for those of us who were just interrupted, I don't think of it as a disadvantage because of the online classes. I think of it as a disadvantage because of what we said about uncertainty and a paralyzed job market. But I do believe that the personal skills that these has taught us are very, very important. And also touching on Sophia's question, I think that's one of the opportunities that I highlight of living this crisis here on my own, is that I've discovered things of myself, and I've developed personal skills that I think I would have not done if I have lived back home, or where everything is simple and where everything is known. Like, I feel like this also makes us push ourselves towards learning and towards trying to do the best we can with all the uncertainty. And regarding the job market, I think those skills are way more valuable than what can be taught inside a classroom.
If I can join to and also try to add to this conversation, I think this time allows us to be more creative, and that we will be able to do that in different ways. When it comes to looking for a job for recent graduates, I think standing out will be defined differently. Before, it was the CV, is it correct? How do I behave in an interview, in-person interview? I think now we will find we need to find new ways to network, first of all, because personal contact will not happen, and it will not be as easy as going to an academic event or a conference and getting to know your future employer or your future boss. I think now we are all in the same situation, and one of the things I would suggest to those who are looking for a job is to take advantage of that. And basically, as we are all in the same situation, that barrier of empathy is already, let's say, not there anymore, as in the lack of empathy, I meant. So I would suggest to dare and write to your ideal employer and to see what are the opportunities, because now not only recruitment processes are being delayed or affected, but think that also people that are in jobs are also facing salary cuts. They're perhaps working half-time. So this for sure will be a priority for the companies, but I also see that there might be opportunities to find those jobs. And my final message in this sense is to experiment and to see, to look for new ways on how to be more creative and to reach to those people that might be or might give you an opportunity in the future.
Yes, I echo what you both said. So we only have 15 minutes, and just to have enough time for all of you to say a few words, we'll just conclude, and I'll just give a space for all of you to say final words, really whatever you want. I think ASU and PJCOMEXI is really known for an exchange of ideas, of positive, feedback, of actions, of stuff like that. Sorry. Timing. So anything that you really want to say, just go ahead, and we'll go back to, as I kind of see you on the screen. So Mia, you go first.
Sure. So I'll just, I think, kind of echo briefly what I said before. I mean, I'm from Arizona. I grew up in Arizona. And so I have always seen kind of the US and Mexico as super connected and more one region than kind of two different countries, the US and Mexico as a whole. And so I think that is my hope and my call coming out of this, is that we don't let the temporary physical distance separate us from connecting with each other in ways like this. And like I said, I think working together towards solutions to all of the problems that we share, which obviously aren't going to go away. So I think that's my hope coming out of this, is that we have time to reflect, and that it's physical distancing, but it's not social or cultural distancing, and that, we come out of this kind of more closer together. So thank you so much for letting me be part of this conversation, and to everyone who's listening as well.
Thank you, Mia. Jason?
Yeah, so I'm going to speak just to graduate students, at all programs. master's, PhD, whatever. I guess I have a few kind of messages, thoughts. One is there's a lot of narrative going on around, being productive right now and being productive in this moment, being productive during COVID, being productive, with, the anti-police protests. It's hard, right? It's hard. And I would just like to share some of the things that my advisor kind of told me, because I thought they were decent. He kind of told me to just right now prepare to, streamline the dissertation. Don't, if it was going to be, 9 chapters and be roughly 300 and some pages, maybe it should be 6 chapters and 200 and something pages. Like right now, see where your silences might be. See where COVID might be keeping you from certain, abilities to interview, abilities to research, and try to, a lot of asterisks are going to say, because of COVID, but if you, can start thinking about that scaffolding now, maybe you can, produce a stronger narrative, work around those and highlight those in different ways. And then also, like my advisor also told me, and just because, I think at the same time, you shouldn't feel pressured to, read everything or, think of everything. And we already live to some extent a very cushy, albeit underpaid life. But I think there's something a little heavy-handed about the productivity narrative. Because I think that at the same time, we're nerds. We love to read, we love to research, we're passionate about what we care about. So maybe this isn't a time necessarily to, read for an exam or read for your dissertation, or, maybe it's just time to learn how to express yourself in new ways. Because like everybody is saying, we're gonna have to figure out, I don't think our situation lends itself to creativity. People like to say that adversity does do that, right? But I don't necessarily think this does. I think it's gonna have to, and we're gonna have to figure it out, and it's gonna be difficult. But I think maybe taking this time not to necessarily, in terms of means and ends, don't necessarily do it for something else, but, figure out how to communicate to yourself, because you're going through a lot of emotions right now. A lot of this stuff is really difficult and it's hard to think through. And I think that maybe, searching for yourself and how you're going through it and how that shapes your passion and your being able to communicate, maybe you might come out of this a stronger writer. This has been a really difficult time for me, but I had my second piece in Spanish actually come out today, like an hour before this came out. I had another piece come out last week. I gave a lecture to Oxford last week. And I say all this to say is, like, I'm struggling through this and figuring it out on the fly. And if anybody is listening and is graduate school and would like to, have follow-up questions, especially if you study Mexico, it would be my pleasure to continue this conversation with you. So thank you very much for the time, COMEXI and ASU.
Thank you, Jason, and congratulations. That's great news. Rodrigo?
Yeah, actually, I would say to end on a positive note, I think one of the things that we have learned from this situation is that there are new ways, or there are different ways to keep in touch. And there's a need to somehow deepen existing relationships at the family level, at the friendship level. And I would encourage you to perhaps take some moments and take some time and write to people that you have not seen physically for a couple of months, but also people that perhaps you have not spoken to or grow to. I think this is a way to go, to basically get out of the situation for a moment and to breathe. I would also encourage to all the people that are looking for jobs and hesitating or wondering what the future will be, to take your time and to evaluate what are the options even more, of course, within your capabilities, and to be open to different opportunities that may arise, and to look for those in the places that you never imagined, I guess, because this is how perhaps it will become the new normal. And
Thank you. And thank you for those words of encouragement. Mariana?
Yes, thank you. And thank you for COMEXI for organizing this. I think this was a really good event, and listening from people that have experienced similar things that where we are. On a positive note, I mean, it's a little what I already mentioned. I think we have the chance of deciding if we want to learn from this or not, and if this is going to make us better or not. And as Jason said, I mean, we are nerds. We are into all of these issues. We study. I think we have the power to decide, and I think that this has taught us we need to make a change on so many different things. And we need to take advantage of that and actually do things differently. And I just want to encourage people to not let the moment pass, and not let that in a couple of months we go back to normal. Like, normal as it exists won't come back. But I think it's also on us to be better people and to realize that we talked through this about privilege and about being in a privileged position. And I think we should use that in favor of working for people that don't have that privilege. And we cannot allow for this to be forgotten in a couple of months or years. We should just take advantage of that. And for people that are just starting grad school or are thinking about starting, if there's anything I can do to help, don't hesitate to reach out, and I'll be happy to help.
Thank you. That's exactly what I was going to say. So now I'll think about something else while we listen to Diego.
I think those are very, very interesting points. In general, thank you very much for this opportunity, and it's just great to listen and share all these stories of very interesting people across the world. And I definitely would like to echo what Jason and Mariana said, and especially that last part of Mariana. First, I think it's a great time, a great opportunity to kind of dig in on our passions, on our interests, on this geek or nerdy stuff that we have. But then that could lead also to push yourself too much, and just it's also important to balance your interests, personal, well-being, just overall well-being. And I think that's very important. These are tough times. These are historical moments. This is a challenge that our generation, the last generation, and probably only the previous generations in certain extent have really faced. So we're in a unique moment. We will telling our grandsons about this moment probably. So really take the time it's fine sometimes to not be productive. That has happened to all of us. It's sometimes fine to, have a tough time, and especially if you're by yourself. I think just allow yourself also to do that. But also, as time goes by and you find that balance, then it'll be time to work hard and kind of to be flexible and to try to adapt to this new world, because for sure, it won't be like before. And we should work to make it better. And that's the challenge, I think. And in that sense, it comes back with the last piece of Mariana's talk, which is that we all, despite all these challenging moments, right? Turning 30, of course, it's a minor problem compared to the tragedies that the world is living, but it's a personal kind of big deal, right?
I feel you, Diego. I know
every day. I know, and so that's kind of a big deal. But then, if that's our problem, then we're clearly and evidently privileged, and then we have to take advantage of that privilege, work with what we have, and try to, bridge the gap between these terrible inequalities that we've witnessing and that this coronavirus has just made so much evident. And they have been there for years, for decades, for centuries. So I think it's really a burden, but also kind of should be a goal of our generation, of us young people, to work hard on change that world and trying to bring that new normality that bridges the gap between those inequalities and those failures that have been there for ages.
Thank you, Diego. I'm happy belated birthday to you and Jason. Well, Maggie, take it away.
That was needed. First of all, I really want to thank COMEXI and Mia and Aline for hosting and for having me on this conversation. A lot of what I wanted to say has been said already. I think it's important to note that you don't have to feel like you have to be doing something with this time at home. Like, it's okay to take time to process. There's so much going on, and don't burn out, and just take that time for yourself. But I think a note on kind of transitioning, for people who are transitioning, whether it's new jobs or looking for study abroad opportunities or moving on to grad school, I think it's important to don't see the future as like this far off goal, and then there are these certain steps you need to take, like the correct steps that you need to take to hit it. I think it's more important to follow what you're passionate about and what you think is interesting and valuable, because ultimately that's where you will find the most satisfaction with where you're going. And so the upcoming job search or opportunity search is undoubtedly going to be very difficult, and maybe you don't find your dream job or your dream opportunity right away. But that's also okay, because maybe you'll find something that interests you that you hadn't considered before, and that will lead you to new and exciting places as well.
Thank you, Maggie. Well, thank you so much, Mia, Maggie, Jason, Mariana, Rodrigo, and Diego for joining today. It was really a pleasure having you on board and listening to your stories and advice. Also, thank you, ASU and PJCOMEXI, for putting together this very valid space for dialogue, and frankly needed. And just on that note, I think everything has been said. And before we go back to you, Jorge, the only thing I will say is take care of your mental health. I think that's really important. Definitely acknowledge the privilege that we all have to, either have work or be able to access this higher education, and just put that talent to good use, and to help those who are less fortunate than us in a way that respects, ourselves and them, and just, we'll get through this. That's really all that can be said. So, Jorge?
Well, I really agree with you, and I think that it's very important to have this kind of talks with other young professionals. I really enjoy this conversation, and I think that listening to you, how you feel, how you are facing this historical moment, can help other young people to change their minds and think different. I really want to thank you so much, all of you, for sharing with our community your experiences and perspectives. I think that the toughest challenge is to think and stay positive, as you may say, and to look the way to take advantage of these difficult times, and probably think how to make things better, right? So I really appreciate this space. Thank you so much, Helene. Thank you, Mia, Jason, Rodrigo, Diego, Mariana, and Maggie for being here with us. And of course, thank you to Arizona State University and to the team of PJCOMEXI, especially to Axel Cabrera, who helped us to make all this possible. And let's keep in touch and continue with these kind of chats. And please stay safe, and see you next time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Next time.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you all.
See you guys. Take care.
Good night.
Bye-bye
Have
to
a
all
good
of
day.
our community.
Good
Bye.
night. Yes. Let me go to sleep.
Thank you. Enjoy your night.
Ciao.
Bye.
Bye.
Next time.
Adios.